Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is part two of chapter six. This video will focus on the television industry as well as some social issues that the industry is dealing with. So, we left off last video talking about convergence and the way that we watch television. And we know that streaming is a critical aspect of how we watch television now in today's culture and society. YouTube is one of the largest platforms that we watch videos on. In fact, it has 2 billion monthly active users, making it one of the prime targets for advertisers as well as content creators. Netflix comes in second, adding almost 16 million subscribers in the first 3 months of 2020. And so we know that the pandemic has encouraged people to sign up for streaming services, being at home more. They currently sit at close to 183 million subscribers. And in 2020 alone, Netflix has spent over $17 billion to produce original content for the platform. Amazon Prime Video comes in second in terms of subscribers with 150 million members. However, it's hard with Amazon to determine who is actively subscribing to and watching Prime Video or who is just signing up for Amazon Prime. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about those numbers. Now, Disney Plus is another big winner of 2020. They had a huge uptick in new subscribers, which pushed it past Hulu in terms of user numbers this year. And so the global streaming market will be worth upwards of $180 billion by 2027, according to analysts. So this is a part of the business of television that we need to pay particular attention to, both as media consumers and media producers. Now, television tends to follow major programming trends. You may notice that the same types of shows appear again and again. And so we will break down some of the primary program types that television uses. The first is comedy series. There is sketch comedy, which would be like Saturday Night Live, and this features comedy skits. You have situation comedies, also known as sitcoms. These have recurring cast members as well as zany plots. You have everything from Parks and Rec, 30 Rock, Big Bang, and of course, I Love Lucy was one of the iconic sitcoms of its time. Now, domestic comedies are when the characters are more important than the actual plot. And these tend to take place at home, such as Raymond, or work, like The Office or Parks and Rec, or both, like Will and Grace. Dramedies are those that combine drama scenes with comedy. And these could be like Glee or Modern Family that also deal with some serious topics, but overall define themselves as comedy. Now, one comedy series that has made a huge impact is I Love Lucy. In 1951, I Love Lucy began airing, and it was the first TV program filmed before a live Hollywood audience, which of course became a major trend for comedy series in the future. Now, I Love Lucy, during this time, many shows were shooting off kinescope, which was shooting off a monitor. But episodes of I Love Lucy, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and Dragnet survived because they actually shot on film. They weren't just shooting live. And so this allows them to continue and be important to our culture even today. Now, in 2018, The Simpsons surpassed the show Gunsmoke to earn the title of longest running primetime scripted series with its 636th episode. And of course, The Simpsons is still running today and has far surpassed that number now. Another type of programming format for television shows are drama and episodic series. Now, the anthology drama is a particular kind of drama programming, and it features different cast and stories each episode and week. So you can think of these shows like The Twilight Zone and Black Mirror, where you don't have to watch the first episode to understand the second because each episode has a different cast, a different storyline, etc. In addition, we have mini-series. These proved that audiences would watch a compelling ongoing story in prime time. Roots, in fact, is the most watched mini-series in television history. And sometimes people consider shows like American Horror Story, Downton Abbey, and Sherlock as miniseries as well. Now, sponsors tended to not like anthology dramas and miniseries because the audience changed from high to low class. And so you have a harder time in targeting audiences and understanding who you were really selling to with these types of dramas. They're also extremely expensive to make because you're constantly getting new cast and new stories. And so these tend to not be very popular, although shows like The Twilight Zone and Black Mirror have come back in recent years. Now, news programming is another type of program that is important to television's overall programming, of course. NBC started with Meet the Press in 1947, and that is still on the air. It's the oldest show on television, in fact. Now, Camel Newsreel Theater in 1948 was the first daily evening newscast, and they had the Camel News Caravan. In the 50s, we had the Huntley Brinkley Report. And then starting in 1970 and going through today, we have NBC Nightly News, which has gone through a various host of anchors from Tom Brokaw, Brian Williams, and Lester Holt. Brian Williams was important because he tried to break away from the anchorman stereotype, really providing a little bit more commentary, trying to seem more real to the audience. And of course, Lester Holt was the first Black solo anchor, making him an important part of African American history as well as television history. For CBS, the CBS TV News began in 1948. And in 1956, it was the first show taped for rebroadcast for affiliates on Central and Western time zones, making it truly national. And so it allowed for the entire country to be able to see. CBS Evening News is currently still on, but Walter Cronkite was its anchor for over 19 years. And we will watch the clip of him from 1963 during the JFK assassination, one of the most iconic moments of television news history. But another aspect of Walter Cronkite's career that we need to know about is in 1968, Walter Cronkite actually went to Vietnam and said that the US participation in the war had been a mistake. And this was a real turning point for Cronkite, who previously had been very neutral, really the epitome of objective news, and to inject opinion about the war and what was going on during that time was very transformative for the journalistic movement. And it really suggested how extreme his political feelings were on the topic. In fact, Lyndon Johnson said that once we lost Walter Cronkite, we really lost the war. CBS Evening News had a host of other anchors, including Dan Rather and Katie Couric, who was the first female solo anchor of a network broadcast in prime time. Scott Pelley, Jeff Glor, and Nora O'Donnell is currently the anchor for CBS Evening News. Here is the clip that I was referring to of the JFK assassination.
Deal of thought, Grandpa.
Here is a bulletin from CBS News. In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas. The first reports say that President Kennedy has been seriously wounded by this shooting.
Then it was back to the soap opera, but not for long. Soon after, Walter Cronkite was back, reporting from the CBS newsroom, complete with rotary telephones and wire machines.
This picture has just been transmitted by wire. It is a picture taken just a moment or two before the incident. If you can zoom in with that camera, we can get a closer look at this picture.
And almost exactly 1 hour after his initial bulletin, this now famous announcement.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. 2 o'clock
Eastern Standard Time.
So you can see just how television news was transforming the ways that Americans received information at the time, and also how they are part of iconic moments in history, like the JFK assassination. And Walter Cronkite's legacy continues to be honored in the journalism industry, and his standards of neutrality and objectivity still hold today.
Deal of thought.
Now, ABC News began their daily news show in 1953. Barbara Walters was actually hired as the first female co anchor of a network newscast in '76, making her an iconic part of journalism history as well. Now, ABC World News Tonight featured four anchors. It was a unique way of presenting the news that had not been done prior to this. And Max Robinson was the first Black network co anchor of this show and in news history. In 1983, Peter Jennings allowed ABC News to become the most watched newscast in America. And it remained so until NBC Nightly News brought in Tom Brokaw in '96. It has also had a host of anchors, including Elizabeth Vargas, Bob Woodruff, Charles Gibson, Diane Sawyer, and the current anchor, David Muir. ABC and NBC currently vie for first place in the ratings book every 2 months, drawing between 6 and 7 million people each night. And so these are very powerful news programs, and they also have very high ratings in comparison to other types of television programs. News magazine shows are those that take a longer magazine type format. In 1968, 60 Minutes pioneered the news magazine format for television. They typically have about 3 stories an episode, which means that for this long form type of news presentation, this is much longer than the minute 30 that most journalists get to tell a story. Instead, they're roughly between 10 and 15 minutes long, allowing for more in-depth journalism. 60 Minutes really proved that news could be profitable as well, bringing in over $2 billion. And its show producer has called it the most successful TV broadcast in history. It consistently remains in the top 10 shows according to ratings by Nielsen. Now, 2020 is another news magazine show, Dateline and Rock Center. Rock Center has been canceled, but Dateline still exists. And then in the entertainment world, we have news magazine shows like Entertainment Tonight and Access Hollywood. Reality TV is another type of popular television programming. Reality TV is the newest and slightly significant trend, depending upon who you ask. The idea of reality TV was really that it was meant to introduce us to characters that are more like us. And The Real World on MTV was one of the first to do this, bringing in, I think it was 7 strangers into a house to see how they would react. And it's cheap to produce. All you have to do is really hire a crew. You bring in 7 people, rent a house, and watch it roll. Where other shows are having to pay celebrities and actors, lots of cast members. So reality TV is cheap, and it's also entertaining depending upon what show you're watching. And so reality TV has been a significant part of television programming since The Real World. Spanish language TV is an increasingly growing market for television programming. Univision and Telemundo are the primary Spanish language channels. Univision has over 3 million viewers in primetime, making it the 5th ranked network. And so if you have the ability to be bilingual, it can be a wonderful skill to allow you to have a media career, since this is a continually growing trend within the industry. Public television is a different type of television program because it relies on the funding of its viewers, as well as some funds from the federal government. The Public Broadcasting Act of 1967 helped form CPB and PBS, and they were meant to serve those being ignored in the commercial sector, 12 and younger and 50 and older. As I said before, their funds come from donations, 85%, and then the federal government pays about 15% of their cost. Some of the most iconic shows have started on public television, such as Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and Sesame Street. In 1996, there was a new law that networks had to carry at least 3 hours of educational programs. And so many wondered whether PBS was truly necessary now that educational programming was being offered on other types of networks, as well as having many cable or alternative channels cater to these same age ranges and markets, such as the Discovery Channel, Nickelodeon, and Showtime. And of course, we know that HBO has recently, as of 2019, taken on Sesame Street, taking it off PBS and putting it onto HBO streaming. And so there are many changes that go along with that, and also some really great memes. I couldn't help myself. The Soprano Elmos is hilarious. And then, we can always learn something from Tony Soprano about the letter F. And of course, all of the Sesame Street characters are naked. So they belong on HBO. So in terms of regulating TV, the industry has a couple of important rules that have really shaped how it is formed. In 1970, the primetime access rule cut primetime from 4 hours to 3 hours, which freed up the 6 to 7 p.m. Central time slot. This time slot, instead of being for programming and primetime, was intended for news and public affairs. However, many stations just decided to fill it with syndicated game shows or infotainment programs like Access Hollywood, Wheel of Fortune, or Jeopardy! And so this rule wasn't truly effective in trying to get more news and public affairs on the air. In 1970, the financial interest in syndication rules banned networks from making a profit on program syndication, but this rule was revoked in 1995, so now networks can make a profit from syndicated shows, making them more important. And of course, we'll talk about syndication here in a minute. Cable regulation and franchise rules are also very important. In 1965 and then again in 1972, we get the must carry rules. This means local broadcasters and PBS stations can benefit from cable's clear reception. It requires that these local stations and PBS and public television have to be carried on cable. And it prohibits cable companies from carrying a network affiliate from another city of a local station already carrying. And so you can't just get New York's channel because you think it's better programming if you're in New Jersey, for instance. So it really allows for a better, more fair type of cable programming. Now, there was a large debate about whether cable was truly an electronic publisher or whether they were a common carrier. And your textbook talks about this a lot. In 1979, the Midwest Video case allowed the courts to determine whether cable companies could pick and choose what programs and stations to carry. And the FCC decided that cable were common carriers. They don't get involved in the types of content available. So this allowed cities to accept bids from companies to install and manage cable systems. Cable companies paid cities a franchising fee and access to their channels. Now, the Telecommunications Act of 1996 removed regulatory banners for telecommunications. You can now own as many stations as you want, as long as you don't reach more than 39% of the US 120 million TV households. This means that we have fewer owners than we did years ago because the phone, radio, and TV companies can all own each other, which is how we get, AT&T being a phone company, but also having DirecTV and Uverse and things like that. The Telecommunications Act really hoped to spur competition and lower phone and cable rates by allowing for fewer regulatory barriers. However, it really caused the opposite to happen. We get triple play, where digital cable, broadband, internet, and phone services became bundled through cable connections. So if you were able to buy your phone, cable, and internet service through the same provider, they would give you a better discount. And so this caused cable and phone companies to merge, which kept prices high and competition at a minimum. About 90% of US communities don't have viable competition for local cable companies. If you've ever lived in an area where all the cable that you can reach is a certain company, it really means that that company is not going to have any obligation to really provide quality service. So the more competition you get, the better in quality the service you would be provided. So, in this way, it's good that satellite TV, as well as streaming services, is creating more competition as people attempt to cut the cord of cable. Now, the network affiliates are the primary networks are ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, and the CW. Each of these stations have between 200 and 230 affiliates. Networks typically do not own their affiliates. So, for instance, in Birmingham, we have an NBC station that is not owned by NBC. They are an affiliate of NBC, but they are not what is called an owned and operated station. The only owned and operated stations for the major affiliates are in really big cities like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and these are called O&Os. ABC owns 8, CBS has 14 O&Os, NBC has 12 O&Os, and Fox has about 28. Now, stations can preempt network programming under what are called clearance rules. So, for instance, if there was a major storm, but the Alabama football game was showing on CBS, CBS would have the right to break into network programming to keep people safe and to provide that service to them. So this clearance rules say that stations are responsible for what airs on their channel. Like all businesses, the television industry relies on revenue and money in order to make it work. One of the aspects of the television industry that both consumers and um, providers have issues with are retransmission fees. Retransmission fees are the amount of money that cable and satellite companies pay media companies to run their programming. Occasionally, a media company will remove their channels from TV lineups, blacking out that content from cable and satellite subscribers. So, a station like NBC 13 here in Birmingham may decide that they will not provide their programming to Dish any longer because they're not getting enough retransmission fees from Dish TV. And so, what happens is these channels that are supposed to be free over the air are no longer available on the cable or satellite platform. And yet, audiences are still paying for that channel, even if they're not receiving it. And so, this has long been used as a negotiating tactic by media companies. And because of this, retransmission fees have grown significantly in the past couple of years. Retransmission fees added up to about 200 million in 2006, but by 2019 retransmission fees were as high as 11.7 billion dollars. Now, in addition, networks must pay affiliates license fees to carry their programs. The networks tend to sell the bulk of ad time during these national programs in order to recoup these fees. And affiliates get this great programming from the network, and they still have the ability to sell some local ads. Now, in terms of what primetime costs to produce, and of course, primetime are those shows that run between 7 and 9 p.m. Central Time. Uh, these tend to be very costly productions. The shows that we know and love, like This Is Us or The Voice, things like that. And so, producing these shows can be very costly. Now, the below the line costs are the technical side of the production. This includes equipment, special effects, sets, electricians, wardrobe, etc. This makes up about 40% of the cost. The above the line cost is it deals with creative talent, actors, writers, producers, editors, directors. And this is 60% of the cost of producing primetime. Now, in the case of long running shows or shows that use actors that are very well known, their salary demands can drive the cost up to 90% of the production cost. So it's great to have long running shows, but you have to keep in mind that it will continue to affect the budget if those actors become well known or needed for the series. Now, networks also license or rent episodes for two airings, and the license to rent these episodes is about 1.5 million per episode. In 2014, cable shows cost about $1 million for each episode to license. And Breaking Bad, their episodes licensed up to $3 million each. So, this is one way that networks recoup the cost of producing these costly shows. In addition, the show business or the entertainment industry for television can be very risky business. A lot of independents end up getting backed by major film studios such as Sony, Disney, or Warner Brothers because they are often producing these shows at a deficit where they produce the shows and take millions of dollars in funding hits until the show becomes a success. Now, in deficit financing, shows are licensed for less than what they cost to make. If production costs are about $2.5 million per episode, the license fee is only about 1.5 million per episode. So the studio ends up losing over $1 million an episode. And obviously, in a season that is 13 episodes long, those deficits can add up very quickly. So one of the ways that they recoup these deficits is by rerun syndication. In order to get to syndication, where you can charge people to show the old versions of your show, you need over 100 episodes. And so Friends earned more than $4 million an episode in syndication to 250 markets and earned more than $1 billion in syndication. And so you can see that these uh, successes, when you get one, can make a huge financial gain for the production company and the studio, and it makes up for those shows that don't do so well. And therefore, this is why we see a lot of shows get canceled after first season, even if they seem popular. It's because they know that they can't make it to 100 episodes and therefore can't reach syndication. Now, a new hour-long cable drama can cost between $3 and $4 million an episode. If you look at some of the most popular shows in the past few years, Stranger Things cost $6 million an episode for season one and $8 million per episode for season two. The Crown cost over $10 million per episode. Game of Thrones during their final season cost $15 million an episode. And again, those shows that use very well known actors, like The Morning Show, which features Jennifer Aniston and other really well known actors, cost $15 million per episode. So you can see this is a risky business because it costs a lot of money to make television. In terms of risk, news magazine and reality shows are the least risky financially. They're cheaper to produce. You can often produce them in house, which avoids licensing fees. And a show like 60 Minutes actually makes a lot of money in terms of commercial time. So, how much does commercial time generate? Well, in 1980, 1 minute of commercial programming generated about $230,000 for 1 minute of commercial. By the late 1990s, a minute was able to generate 400,000. And so you can demand more money for ad time based on the ratings of the show. So the higher the ratings, the more the production company and network will make for airing it. Now, again, CBS 60 Minutes is one of those cash cows. The producer of the show estimated that it made more than $1 billion for CBS in the first 25 years because, as a new news magazine show, it's cheap to produce, and yet it has some of the highest ratings. It's consistently ranked in the top 10 shows rating wise, and so therefore they can charge a lot more money for their advertising spots. Now, here's a look at how much a 30-second spot cost in 2019 for each of these shows. Sunday Night Football is always the most expensive weekly program on TV because it has some of the highest ratings. Will and Grace is next, followed by The Voice, Young Sheldon, Supergirl, Law and Order SVU, 911, NCIS, Empire, Grey's Anatomy, Good Doctor, Criminal Minds, and This Is Us. Now, This Is Us is the most expensive scripted series for ad time, and yet because of its popularity and large following, advertisers are willing to pay for that spot. What is syndication? I know I've referred to syndication a couple of times in the presentation, but syndication is when uh, TV shows are leased to stations as for the exclusive right to air a show. Now, there are many types of syndication that your textbook refers to. The first are cash deals, which are when stations pay outright for the ability to show the television program on their channel. Cash Plus is when the distributors are able to sell national ads and leave space for local. This keeps cost of production down, and helps offset those costly productions that we just talked about. Barter syndication is when the distributor and the station agree to split ad revenue. And this is often used for news and untested shows like talk shows, to help diminish some of the risk involved there. Now, the National Association of Television Program Directors Convention is like a TV supermarket. This is when all of the shows that are up for syndication are shopped for, and the TV stations and networks and owners decide what programming will be shown on their airwaves. And of course, the primary buyers are King World, 20th Century Fox, Disney, and Time Warner. Now, there are a few types of syndication in terms of shows. Evergreens are some of the older classic shows that people still love to watch, like I Love Lucy, The Andy Griffith Show, and Golden Girls. Early and late fringe syndication are those shows that air before or after prime time, such as Wheel of Fortune. Off network syndication are shows that originally aired on another station that are getting to be shown on a new station. The Big Bang Theory does this, where we can watch old episodes of Big Bang Theory on like TBS or another station. First run syndication are those shows that are made specifically to become a syndicated show. They are not meant for prime time necessarily, and they are broadcast for the first time as a syndicated show. Now, there are really two types of these first run syndications. The first are those, again, made specifically for syndication, like Ellen. Um, and then there are those that come from another country, and were made for non-syndicated release in their country and then came over to American television for first run syndication here. And Judge Judy, of course, is another example of a show that was made specifically for syndication. Now, syndication can be a large part of whether a show is considered successful or not. Seinfeld did not make as much money when it was actually airing. Instead, its syndication is what truly jumped it into people being able to make money off of it. And so Seinfeld actually makes more than $4 billion in syndication, and Netflix just paid $500 million for the streaming rights to it starting in 2021. And then also starting in 2021, Viacom's acquired the cable and satellite rights for $200 to $250,000 per episode. And so you can see that although Seinfeld was extremely popular while it was on air, it's making more money in syndication than it ever could have in live broadcast. Now, in terms of how you know whether a show is successful or not, it comes down to the ratings. Ratings are the statistical estimate of the percentage of households watching a program within a market or a geographic area. Nielsen is the company that tracks viewership in terms of ratings and shares. And a ratings point in 2014 was 1.16 million viewers. So when you say that you got like an 8 ratings point in the Nielsen market, you were really talking about 8.8 million viewers. A share is the estimate of those who turned in compared to those with their TV on. So while ratings talk about how many households have a TV, they're not necessarily all on at that time, while a share is the estimate of those who had their TV on, who were watching programming. How many of those people did you capture in your viewership? In 2006, Nielsen began to get DVR ratings as well, although these are not as accurate, perhaps, and not as they're not paid as close attention to as live viewers. And of course, streaming is making this a whole new audience because you are trying to track how many people are streaming your show versus how many are watching it live, how many people DVR it. And so there are many, many ways to track ratings and shares now. So, ratings and shares provide advertisers, networks, and local stations with the demographic information on viewers, as well as knowing how many people are watching. The advertisers are wanting to know who is watching. And typically, advertisers are targeting the demographic of 18 to 49-year-olds. You can imagine why. It's because those are the people with the money and the spending habits that advertisers are trying to tap into. So here's an example of how you can calculate the households using television, the ratings, and the shares. So here you see that there are 6 houses, green, blue, and orange, that are using television versus the total number of households that actually have TV. So the households using televisions would be a 6 out of 10 share or a 60. If you have a rating of 3, let's say you're channel 2 and you want to know what your rating is. Well, you have 3 houses that have channel 2 on versus the total number of TV households. So you have a 30 share in the market because 3 out of 10 households are watching your program or your channel. A share, on the other hand, is going to be the number of people watching your channel over the households using television, the HUT that we got in number 1. So if you're channel 2, the greenhouse, then you have 3 households using channel 2 over 6 households using television, which gives you a 50 share. So, this is how advertisers and channels and programmers are able to calculate their ratings and shares. And these numbers are critically important for media producers to know what shows are successful. Here is a diary that Nielsen used to use for TV viewing. Uh, the These diaries would require someone to go in using a paper form and track what shows they were watching. And so you can see this is actually from Dr. Finkley's house. So you can see Bruce, his wife Jackie, his daughter Harper, and they would write what station they were watching. They watched Good Morning America first on WABM, and they marked the time of day that they were watching it and for how long. And so then, of course, they're a younger household at this time. So they watch Jack Hanna, and then they watch Mickey Mouse Clubhouse and things like that. And if you know Dr. Bruce, or Dr. Finkley rather, you know that he is a huge Star Trek fan. So of course he had Star Trek: The Next Generation on. Now, these household diaries are not used nearly as much as they used to be. Now we use monitors that actually connect to your television because, as you can imagine, these diaries were not very reliable in terms of what people were watching. Maybe you were watching Sex in the City and you thought that that was embarrassing. Well, you wouldn't put it down, and no one would be able to know whether or not you were telling the truth. And so these Nielsen monitors allow for decoders to monitor what stations you're watching, and then they transmit the data to Nielsen every day so that reports can be generated on shares and ratings for each program. So now that you know a little bit more about the television and cable industry, make sure you go into your discussion post about must carry regulations and ownership. And then after you finish that discussion post, make sure you read chapter 7 about movies for next week. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I will be talking to you soon.